Weeks ago, everything was silent for Lilly and Jack. No updates, no leads, no answers. But now, everything's changed. Info is flooding in, nonstop, from the families, from strangers, from live streams, from back channels, from whispers in the dark to people going public. Some of it's verified, some of it's chaos, sworn truths, blatant lies. The truth is getting buried. This isn't just a search anymore, it's a war of voices. Who's lying? Who's telling the truth? What are they telling for? And have they all forgotten what really matters? Lilly and Jack are still missing. Darren Gettys. Darren Gettys, known online and in livestream discussions by the nickname Darwood, is a resident of Trenton, Nova Scotia. Darren is a second cousin of Malaya Brooks Murray, the children's mother. This family connection has been publicly confirmed by Belinda Gray, the children's biological grandmother. Professionally, Darren has over 30 years of experience in the mining industry throughout the Nova Scotia region. He describes himself as someone who is very familiar with how things work in this area, referring to the social dynamics, geography, and community structures that outsiders might overlook. Additionally, his own son once worked alongside Daniel Martell, the children's stepfather. That personal link, according to Darren, has given him insight into Daniel's background and character. In the context of the missing persons case, Darren has positioned himself as a key whistleblower, someone who claims to have critical information that could unlock the truth behind what happened to Lilly and Jack. He says that he received this information from a confidential insider, a person who knows the entire story from beginning to end. In his words, this person knows the story from front to back. Darren refuses to publicly reveal the source's identity unless the information turns out to be false. I'm not going to give you the name unless this information turns out to be wrong. He believes it is his responsibility to protect this individual and their safety, while also standing firmly by the accuracy of what he's been told. He goes as far as calling the source ironclad, meaning rock solid and unshakably credible. To further strengthen the credibility of his claims, Darren says he has cross-referenced the insider's statements with information from other people, and everything checks out. I've corroborated it with other people. Darren claimed that his aim is to fully convince the status of the kids. The goal is to raise awareness and pressure authorities to act swiftly, fearing that any further delay could mean losing the chance to recover the children safely. In his previous public statement, Darren shared a series of allegations that pointed directly at Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother of missing children Jack and Lilly Sullivan. According to Darren, Malaya was not simply caught up in a tragic disappearance. She orchestrated the escape. He claimed that Malaya personally placed her children into a vehicle driven by another person. And from that point, they vanished. Darren stated that he is almost certain he knows the identity of the driver who received the children, suggesting this was a coordinated handoff rather than an abduction or random event. In his words, the children were intentionally removed from the area. What triggered this sudden flight? Darren said that he had purposely set up a situation where someone could overhear a conversation mentioning a suspicious individual's name. Just 30 minutes after that staged conversation, Malaya panicked. She grabbed her youngest child, Meadow, and fled from her mother's house in Wentworth, without warning. To Darren, this was clear proof that Malaya felt exposed and decided to act fast to disappear. He also suggested that her destination may have been the Shubenacadie First Nation, a location known for its complex legal boundaries. Darren pointed out that Malaya's lawyer is the brother of the chief of that reserve, raising the possibility that she fled there in search of legal cover, protection, or simply a place where authorities would face challenges locating her or regaining custody of the children. Perhaps the most clear detail came from a key eyewitness, Janie, the stepmother of Daniel Martell, the children's stepfather. On the morning the children went missing, Janie reported seeing Malaya standing on the side of a rural road near Daniel's property, a place where, At that hour, no one had any reason to be. According to Janie, Malaya looked visibly shaken. Her facial expression was one of fear and anxiety, as if she had just done something serious and didn't want to be noticed. Darren interpreted this moment as the exact time Malaya handed the children over to someone else, shortly before vanishing herself. She looked scared, like she had just handed the kids off or done something, and didn't want anyone to see her, he explained. The timing of that sighting matched precisely with the period the children were believed to have disappeared. This wasn't a coincidence, Darren emphasized. To him, the entire situation, from the hurried departure to the roadside sighting, suggests a planned escape, not a sudden action. For the status of the kids, Darren has made it undeniably clear. He believes Jack and Lilly Sullivan are alive. "I believe 1000% that those kids are alive," he declared that, a statement he would return to again and again. According to Darren, the children are not dead, not abandoned, and certainly not forgotten. They are, in his words, safe. In Darren's view, the children are currently under the protection of a group that knows exactly what's going on. He stated that Jack and Lilly are being cared for, not in danger, and are likely with a native community, a group that understands the risks surrounding their situation and has intentionally stepped in to shield them from further trauma, legal threats, or public exposure. They're safe. They're being taken care of. He assured his listeners that their current circumstances involve care and protection, not neglect or harm. What makes this more urgent is their belief that Jack and Lilly may no longer be in Canada. He plainly stated, "They could be out of the country already." This alarming possibility came with a warning: time is running out. Too much time has already passed since their disappearance, he said, giving those involved in the children's removal ample opportunity to move them far away, potentially across international borders. This theory is not without some supporting context. On a livestream where Daniel online to tell about the run of Malaya from RCMP and CPS, he mentioned that Malaya, the children's mother, had asked only for the kids' birth certificates, school photos, and 2 stuffed animals, items clearly tied to the children, especially Lily's and Jack's, but nothing else. Everything else she owned was left behind. The implication is that she may have been preparing for a deliberate and focused escape, possibly with all the kids, definitely including Lilly and Jack. As for the logistics of this possible escape, Darren pointed to Plattsburgh, New York as a potential crossing point. He suggested that a planned handoff occurred, and that a vehicle carrying the children may have slipped quietly across the US-Canada border, heading south. This wasn't a random route, he implied, it was carefully calculated. The children could now be far beyond the reach of Canadian authorities, hidden somewhere that complicates legal or police intervention. Darren also raised another possibility that the children are being hidden within or near First Nations territories. These areas, he explained, can be jurisdictionally complex, a fact that may be used to delay or obstruct formal investigations. In such communities, families or guardians may receive legal or cultural protection, making it significantly harder for external agencies to retrieve the children without lengthy negotiations. He described these areas as safe havens, places where people might shelter the children intentionally out of distrust for the authorities, or a belief that removing the children from their current situation was an act of protection. Beside that, Darren mentioned the people who helped Malaya disappear with her children in his talk. They weren't strangers or criminal masterminds. According to Darren Gettys, they were just a group of young girls, roughly the same age as Malaya herself. She had some friends around her that were her age. He emphasized that these weren't experienced adults or professionals. They were peers, girls acting out of loyalty, fear, and a desire to protect one of their own. What makes this group more than just concerned friends is the complex web of connections tying them to Malaya. Darren described them as semi-related, meaning they had some level of familial or cultural connection through either shared family ties or indigenous heritage. These weren't random people. They came from similar backgrounds, and some had even grown up under comparable family circumstances, multiple father figures, stepfathers, and ties to indigenous identity. This shared experience may have fostered a deep sense of empathy, perhaps even trauma bonding. Darren noted, "They were all girls. This detail matters. It paints the picture of a tight-knit, all-female circle, a group that likely confided in each other, reinforced each other's fears, and created an echo chamber where panic could spread unchecked. When Malaya expressed distress or fear, these girls didn't question it, they felt it with her, and they reacted on impulse. Think about a group of young girls trying to get their friend out of trouble." Darren urged listeners to consider. Their intentions weren't evil. They believed they were rescuing their friend from danger. But good intentions don't mean smart decisions. He didn't mean to insult them, he meant they acted rashly. Emotionally, without a legal plan, they didn't consult adults. They didn't seek guidance. He said that, "If they had talked to an old idiot like myself, we might have been able to give them a better way to do that." There were alternatives. Ways Malaya could have left legally and safely, with her kids protected and her rights intact. But instead, the group chose the chaotic, underground route. Though Darren never says it directly, the subtext is clear: this group may not have just helped her escape. They may also be hiding the children in a remote indigenous community, across provincial borders, or even outside of Canada. For Malaya, from the very beginning, Darren made it clear that he doesn't believe she's a monster or a criminal mastermind. Instead, he sees a woman who is emotionally fragile, likely struggling with unhealed trauma. He thinks she might have had postpartum depression. Maybe PTSD. Darren said during a live stream. That wasn't a throwaway line, it was a direct observation rooted in concern. In Darren's eyes, the chaos that has followed Malaya since the disappearance of her children isn't evidence of malice. It's evidence of someone who is psychologically overwhelmed, drowning in fear, and unable to make rational choices. She definitely had some issues a young girl in her situation wanted out of there. That was looking at it like she just couldn't stand the situation anymore. She just wanted to change her life. But yet she's very soft, very mild-mannered, not aggressive, no real power, no real ability to walk out of that totally herself. With that, Darren painted a portrait of a woman not built for conflict, not built for deception, and certainly not capable of orchestrating a complex disappearance. His words suggest that any drastic action taken by Malaya wasn't out of cunning, but rather out of desperation. She is, in his view, deeply impressionable, easily swayed by emotion, and incapable of navigating pressure without breaking down. And break down she did. Darren described her emotional state with startling clarity. Malaya was scared. Hellish scared. Maybe she had a reason to be scared. Those aren't words used lightly. He didn't just say she was nervous or anxious. He described a crippling level of fear, one that might justify irrational behavior. What's notable is his allowance for ambiguity. Maybe she had a reason to be scared. Darren isn't ruling out the possibility that Malaya truly felt threatened. Whether the threat was real or perceived doesn't even matter. What matters is that she believed it was, and that belief shaped her every move. This fear, Darren suggested, didn't stay contained. He said that, "I think they were swept up in her storm." He referred to the young group of girls who allegedly helped Malaya disappear. If Malaya was the eye of the emotional hurricane, they were pulled into its spiral, panicked, misinformed, and ultimately complicit in something they likely didn't fully understand. It wasn't a plan. It was a reaction. A storm of raw emotion. Had she been in a better headspace, Darren thinks things would have gone another way. If she had come to someone like me, we could have walked her out peacefully, legally, with help. That line says it all. Darren isn't just claiming there were other options. He's mourning the fact that Malaya was too emotionally damaged to see them. Instead, she fled. She broke Child Protective Services protocol by leaving the home where she was supposed to remain under supervision. As a result, CPS stripped her of her custody rights, viewing her as unstable and unreliable. This theory is eerily consistent with what Daniel Martell, Malaya's ex-partner and the children's stepfather, shared in the livestream. Daniel claimed that Malaya's PTSD stemmed from her previous relationship with Cody, the children's biological father. According to him, Malaya was deeply traumatized from 5 years with Cody. And even years later, she still lived in fear of him. Daniel framed Cody as the root cause of her emotional collapse and eventual spiral. But here's where the story fractures. Belinda Gray, the children's paternal grandmother, tells a very different story. According to her, Cody was calm, compliant, even resigned after the breakup. He had accepted Malaya's decision and had voluntarily given up custody. In fact, he had not seen his children in nearly 3 years and was completely absent during the initial searches for the missing kids. Even though Belinda was out searching from day one, Cody never joined her, despite living with her for the past 9 months. That contradiction is hard to ignore. If Cody was the terrifying abuser Daniel described, why does Belinda paint him as passive and absent? And if Cody really posed such a threat, why did he seemingly vanish from every aspect of this investigation? There are only 2 possible explanations. Either someone is lying, or somebody's telling only part of the truth to deflect suspicion and protect their narrative. Darren's theory that Malaya's mental health decline pushed her into irrational, fearful action makes sense on its own. But when layered with the conflicting accounts about Cody, it raises more questions than answers. Did she run because she was scared of Cody? Or did she run because others were telling her she should be? Was it a real threat? Or an implanted fear? And most importantly, who's really trying to help the truth come out, and who's just trying to protect themselves? Darren's frustration for this case is unmistakable. He's watched as days turn into weeks and weeks into months, and in his view, the RCMP and Canadian authorities have moved far too slowly. They're doing it way too slow. They're sitting back and letting it slip. For Darren, the situation is urgent, and the consequences of inaction are irreversible. You have a very small window. Once they're gone, they're gone. But Darren isn't just criticizing, he's offering direction. He's asking the police to stop chasing shadows and start following real leads, many of which he believes he has already uncovered. One of his strongest assertions is that the children may no longer be in Canada. He insisted that they need to talk to the American border officials. If the children crossed the border, whether by accident, deception, or with help, then continuing to focus only on local towns in Nova Scotia is a dangerous waste of time. According to Darren, the children were last seen on a farm near Tadamagoch, a region close to Indigenous territory, and not far from routes that could lead south. He believes it's possible that they were hidden temporarily in a native reservation, an area where outside law enforcement may hesitate to operate without coordination. They may have crossed through a native reservation, he said, and urged officials to coordinate with tribal and regional leadership to ensure no area is overlooked. More than just geography, Darren called out the bureaucratic paralysis he believes has defined this case. Quit the politics. Quit the delay. Go find these kids. He made it clear that finger-pointing, interdepartmental conflicts, and procedural hesitations are costing valuable time and potentially lives. While Darren has his own sources and suspicions, he is realistic about his limitations. No one else can do this. Only trained investigators and government officials have the resources, authority, and reach to bring Jack and Lilly home. Despite his criticisms, Darren places the responsibility firmly in the hands of those with power, and he's begging them to use it. His tone is urgent, but not hopeless. Darren believes the children are still alive. He believes there's still time. But that belief is shrinking by the day, and if officials continue down the path of inaction, the window may slam shut forever. This isn't just about Darren trying to prove a theory. It's about 2 missing children, a terrified mother, and a trail that's growing colder by the hour. The question now isn't whether something should be done, it's whether the right people will finally do it. For Darren himself, many viewers found themselves torn. Not just by the content of what he said, but by the questions he left unanswered. Darren insisted that he had verified the information he shared through multiple channels. He said he corroborated it with other people. But here's the problem, he never tells us who those people are. Are they witnesses? Are they law enforcement? Are they involved in the case at all? Without names, dates, or even context, Darren is essentially asking the public to take his word for it. And when the stakes are this high, 2 missing children, trust me, doesn't go very far. Even more puzzling is the timing. According to Darren, he's known most of this from the beginning. So why speak up now, weeks, even months after the children vanished? He offers no clear explanation for the delay. That silence leads to speculation. Was he holding this back on purpose? Did he only step forward under the weight of public pressure? Or worse, is this a calculated release, designed to control the narrative, just when attention starts to shift? When pressed on the source of his information, Darren refused to give a name. He wouldn't give the name unless this information turns out to be wrong. That sounds convenient, an invisible source, protected unless exposed by error. But who is this person, really? A family insider? Someone involved in the escape? Could it be Malaya herself? Darren won't say. And that silence creates more than just mystery, it creates doubt. Because if the source is real, reliable, and motivated to help, why remain hidden? Another layer of concern comes from Darren's personal relationship with Daniel Martell, the children's stepfather. Darren openly stated that his son used to work with Daniel, and that he knows him pretty well. And while he never explicitly says he supports Daniel, his language often defends him, while simultaneously painting Malaya as emotionally unstable, scared, and unfit. This raises a very real question: is Darren biased? Could his closeness to Daniel, whether intentional or not, have colored the way he interprets and delivers the story? Even the intentions of Darren's unnamed source are unclear. He claims this person knows the story from front to back. But then, what does this person want? Are they trying to find the kids? Protect Malaya? Expose Daniel? Or could they be manipulating the situation from the shadows, feeding Darren information with a personal agenda no one else can see? And finally, there's the core of it all, Darren's confidence. He refers to the story as ironclad. But the truth is, he's the only person who's heard it, interpreted it, and shared it publicly. There's no transcript, no direct quotes, no independent verification. That gives Darren full control, not just over the message, but over what's included and what's left out. Whether intentional or not, that opens the door for distortion, exaggeration, or even omission. So while Darren may be genuine in his desire to help, and his words may contain pieces of truth, the inconsistencies around his narrative, from timing to sourcing to personal ties, make it impossible to ignore the possibility of bias or manipulation. In a case this complex, truth isn't just about what's said. It's also about who's saying it, why they're saying it, and what they're not saying at all. The text from Malaya. Previously, a YouTube channel leaked a private chat exchange between Malaya and Belinda Gray, the paternal grandmother of Jack and Lilly Sullivan. At the time, the authenticity of that conversation was uncertain, but in recent days, it has now been confirmed as real. Just yesterday, that same YouTube channel released another leaked conversation between Malaya and Belinda, further deepening the mystery surrounding this case. In these messages, Malaya openly expressed doubts about Daniel Martell, the stepfather of her children. Though she didn't accuse him outright of wrongdoing, her words were filled with unease. He's been acting suspicious and is too worried about what people think about him, and not focus on my kids at all. She went further, accusing him of attempting to access her funds through a Temu account linked to her debit card. This kind of financial manipulation, if true, would be deeply troubling, especially during such a critical time. Malaya also revealed that Daniel had been warned by police to stay away from her and refrain from speaking to the media. That detail is not part of any official record but, if verified, could suggest that authorities had reasons to be concerned about his behavior. At the same time, Daniel was reportedly telling people that Malaya herself had taken the kids that morning, only to return to bed and pretend nothing happened. Even a cousin of her grandmother, likely Darren, echoed this version. Her response: quiet resignation. Let him say whatever he wants. I can't say anything to anyone anymore. It sounded less like a defense and more like emotional surrender. What Malaya did make clear was that her current focus wasn't just on the missing children, but also on her youngest daughter, Meadow. When asked who she was protecting Meadow from, she responded with one word: CPS. This confession hit hard. It suggested she was actively hiding Meadow from Child Protective Services, raising legal and ethical red flags. My main focus right now is to protect Meadow and find my kids, she said, making it clear that she viewed CPS as more of a threat than a resource. Throughout the messages, Malaya showed a strong aversion to public discourse. She said she avoided media coverage and didn't want people sending her updates. If they feel it is of concern, send it to the police. This withdrawal from community support channels only deepened the mystery. It created a communication vacuum filled by speculation, rumor, and conflicting family narratives. One of the most disturbing aspects of the leak is the tone. Observers noted that Malaya didn't express the kind of urgency or visible panic one might expect from a mother whose children are missing. One line from the leak stood out. She says she doesn't know where her kids are, but she's not screaming it from the rooftops. This flat emotional response raised questions. Was it numbness, trauma, or something else? Meanwhile, the family itself appears fractured. Messages indicate that even close relatives, including a cousin of the children's grandmother, were publicly supporting Daniel's version of events. That level of division is rare in missing persons cases, where families often present a united front. Each piece of the leak added layers to an already complicated narrative. If Daniel truly tried to steal money from Malaya, why hasn't that been pursued legally? If CPS was actively seeking Meadow, where was the order or official report? If Daniel was warned by police, where is the documentation? The public is left with pieces of a puzzle, and no official version to tie them together. The most haunting question might be, if Malaya is innocent, why does she sound so defeated? And if she is guilty, why does she continue to claim she wants to find her children? Her silence could be self-preservation. Her caution could be legal advice. Or perhaps, she knows more than she's let on. Adding even more complexity, there are unconfirmed reports suggesting that Malaya's own mother may have been the one controlling her access to social media and communication during the early days of the investigation. It's believed that she was heavily managing how Malaya presented herself to the public, including what could or could not be shared online. Coupled with growing speculation that Malaya is on the run from CPS and possibly the RCMP, this paints a troubling picture of someone not only avoiding the law, but actively removing all digital footprints. In fact, she has deleted every post about her missing children, including pleas for help. That behavior has led some to believe that she may know exactly where the children are, and that legal consequences have become secondary to her goal of keeping control over the situation. This has sparked speculation that the leaked messages themselves may have originated from her mother, rather than Malaya directly, possibly as a form of damage control or narrative shaping. Regardless, the leak did more than just expose a private conversation. It ripped open the emotional and legal tensions festering beneath the surface of the Sullivan case. It gave us a raw, unfiltered look at a mother in crisis, or perhaps in hiding. And it reminded us that in cases like these, the truth is often tangled, emotional, and anything but clear. These leaked messages won't solve the mystery of Jack and Lilly Sullivan, but they do change how we see the players involved. They blur the lines between victim and suspect, between protector and threat, and they challenge us to ask harder questions, not just about what happened, but about who we should believe when everything else has gone silent. A significant part of the critics towards Malaya stems from accusations made by Daniel Martell and those closely aligned with him. These claims, about her allegedly fleeing with the children, hiding Meadow from CPS, and showing little urgency, surfaced with precise timing, each piece aligning seamlessly to form a narrative that was both convenient and easy for the public to digest. The effect was powerful. Malaya's silence began to sound less like caution and more like confession. But in the rush to believe this version of events, many have forgotten that for weeks, Daniel himself was the central figure under suspicion. His actions, his behavior, and even his public statements had once painted him as the prime suspect. Before we accept this new storyline too quickly, it's worth revisiting the serious allegations that Daniel faced at the start of this case. Because if we follow the evidence, we may find that the truth isn't nearly as one-sided as it now appears. Signs of control and abuse. It's important to note, these signs, while deeply unsettling, remain circumstantial. No official medical records or eyewitness testimony have confirmed abuse. At this stage, everything we see points to suspicion, not proof. But the number of red flags surrounding Lilly and Jack Sullivan cannot be ignored. One of the most disturbing images came from a photo of Lilly holding her baby sister. People immediately noticed something was off. Her arms were shockingly thin. Her arms are the same width from shoulder to wrist. That's a red flag in child starvation. Indeed, medical professionals point out that when a child's arm doesn't taper, when there's no visible fat or muscle, it can indicate serious malnutrition. This wasn't just a skinny kid. This was a clinical red flag. Lilly's hands raised other concerns. In a photo from December, observers noticed her fingernails were caked with dirt, highly unusual for a 4-year-old indoors during a cold Nova Scotia winter. It's not just about a child playing outside. It points to a deeper problem: poor hygiene, neglect, or even a situation where a child has to care for themselves in an unclean environment. Jack, her younger brother, showed signs as well. In a photo taken on a day he attended school, Jack had what appeared to be a bruise or sore on his jaw. His lips were cracked. His shirt was oversized and visibly dirty. For a child to be sent to school in that condition suggests neglect, and the fact that no one reported it. That may speak to irregular attendance or barriers to school staff raising concerns. Multiple photos of both children show recurring minor injuries: cracked lips, skin lesions, dry, patchy skin. These might seem insignificant alone, but when repeated and untreated, they point toward an environment lacking even basic care. Insufficient hydration, poor nutrition, exposure to cold, or absence of medical treatment. Malaya, their mother, claimed the children were allowed outside even when they were sick. That alone raises questions. Moreover, there's no public record of pediatric care, vaccination history, or dental visits for either child. In short, no medical trail. For kids aged 4 and 6, that's not just unusual. It's alarming. The silence from the school system only adds to the unease. Across all media reports and police briefings, there has been no official statement from any preschool or elementary institution regarding Lilly or Jack. This opens a troubling possibility. Perhaps the children hadn't been attending school regularly. Perhaps they'd been pulled out long before anyone realized they were gone. That expands the possible window of disappearance well before May 2nd. Then there's the matter of how the children looked in photos. Not just physically, but emotionally. Online sleuths and former professionals pointed out the obvious. The kids weren't smiling with their eyes. They look like they've been told to smile. One person noted, "It's a concept known as emotional incongruence, when the eyes and the mouth don't match." Experts in abuse cases often see it in children who've been coerced, threatened, or forced to pose for photos under stress. Rumors from within the community suggested even darker possibilities. One person claiming to know the family wrote, they would withhold meals if Jack didn't behave. This claim, while unverified, mirrors textbook psychological abuse, using food as control. If true, it fits with Jack's underweight frame and possibly withdrawn demeanor. Even the home environment reflected warning signs. When search crews entered the property after the disappearance, they found no toys, no backpacks, no personalized belongings for the children, no favorite blankets, no books. Nothing that signaled two young kids had been living there. Investigators didn't find signs of a struggle, but they also didn't find the usual mess of a life shared with kids. It was as if the space had been scrubbed. Not just cleaned, but erased. Another chilling layer comes from comparisons between the children. Baby Meadow, the biological child of Dan Martell and Malaya, appeared well-fed, healthy, and clean in every image. Her step-siblings, Lilly and Jack, children from Malaya's previous relationship, looked malnourished, tired, and overlooked. That kind of disparity in care isn't just accidental. In many child welfare cases, it points to intentional neglect and unequal treatment based on blood relation. There's more. Daniel himself once wrote, "Jack doesn't talk much, he mostly grunts or makes sounds." If true, Jack may have been nonverbal or developmentally delayed, a condition that would make him even more vulnerable. A child who can't clearly communicate is harder to protect and easier to isolate. A relative noted that Jack was clingy and nervous, especially around strangers or loud noises. They said that he'd hide behind his sister. Behavioral markers like that can be signs of emotional trauma, chronic fear, or even early PTSD. It's not a diagnosis, but it's a flashing yellow light. Nutrition was another issue. A local who once brought food to the family recalled, "All they had in the house was cereal. That's what they fed the kids. No fruits, no vegetables, no proteins." A diet like that, if sustained over time, would absolutely lead to physical decline seen in both children. And lastly, one neighbor admitted to hearing shouting from the house. Sometimes you could hear yelling if you got close. But most folks kept to themselves there. It was rural, isolated, and like many remote places, people didn't want to interfere. The children weren't the only alleged victims. One of the earliest and most consistent red flags in this case is the isolation of Malaya Brooks, Murray, physical, familial, social, psychological, and financial. Before the disappearance of Lilly and Jack, it appears that Malaya herself had already disappeared in plain sight. As mentioned, they lived off Gallock Road in Lansdowne Station, Nova Scotia. The house wasn't just rural. It was buried, down an unpaved road, surrounded by forest, far from anyone who might drop by unannounced. As one local put it that, it's way out on Garlock Road. Not paved, hard to reach. Especially in winter. There were no neighbors to hear things. No cameras. No witnesses. Anyone wanting to see them had to be invited in. And Daniel Martell decided who got invited. The digital isolation was just as stark. Their home didn't have consistent internet service. That meant no FaceTime calls, no regular social media updates, no way for loved ones to casually check in. It also meant that if Malaya needed help, there was no simple way to ask for it. The house became a black hole. Nothing came out. That void extended to family. According to both her mother and sister, Malaya and the kids hadn't been seen in over a year. One said that, "We haven't seen the kids since early last year." Every attempt to visit was met with excuses. Every time we ask to visit, there's always an excuse. The pattern was unmistakable. After she met Daniel, Malaya stopped attending family dinners. She stopped calling back. She stopped showing up. A relative summed it up. "She just disappeared from us." That's not natural. That's isolation. Even within her own community, the Sepekgatik First Nation, she became a stranger. No one had recent contact. No one saw her at local gatherings. No one knew what was happening in her life. And online, she went dark. Her social media fell silent. When the kids were reported missing, every photo posted was old, months, sometimes a year outdated. There were no fresh images. No recent proof of daily life. It was as if time had stopped inside that house. A former friend said it best. "She don't go out. Just stays inside. Keeps to herself." But isolation didn't stop at geography or social interaction. There was also financial dependence, a crucial ingredient in behavioral control. Daniel claimed he didn't go to work on May 2nd because work had slowed down. Yet no one could confirm what work he did, or how he earned money. And as for Malaya, there's no record of her holding any job. No mention of personal income. No bank account in her name. Nothing to suggest financial autonomy. Everything, from food to clothing to baby supplies, was reportedly handled by Daniel. In his words, he took care of all of it. She didn't drive. She didn't go shopping. She had no means to leave, even if she wanted to. This wasn't just circumstantial. It was structural. For the behavior, from the start, Daniel Martell positioned himself, not just as the spokesperson, but as the sole narrator. They wandered off. They just walked away. He said that before police, before media, before anyone asked. He didn't wait for evidence. He didn't entertain possibilities. He locked in a story. And no one else was allowed to tell a different one. Not even their mother. Malaya Brooks Murray, the children's mother, was noticeably absent, not just physically, but vocally. She didn't speak to press. She didn't write a post. She didn't appear in a single video pleading for help. Every piece of communication came from Daniel. He wrote the updates. He answered the questions. When someone asked how Malaya was doing, he replied, "She's resting. She agrees with me." Not once did she speak for herself. That's not grief. That's erasure. Daniel didn't just speak on her behalf. He claimed her silence as proof. She doesn't want to talk. She's been through enough. As if her voice no longer belonged to her. As if he was doing the world a favor by speaking for both. It's a strategy known to psychologists, coercive unification, using language to make someone else disappear inside your own authority. Behind closed doors, Daniel's dominance went deeper. In one leaked message, he wrote, "They listen to me, not her." A chilling statement, not just about the kids, but about household power. From money to meals to crisis response, Daniel called every shot. There was no evidence Malaya made independent decisions. In fact, when her own mother tried to visit, Daniel blocked her, then lashed out. "Stop accusing us. You weren't here." Even disagreement was rewritten. When a relative said the kids would never go near the road alone, Daniel snapped back. "They did it before. You just don't know because you weren't around." It's classic gaslighting, recasting reality, making others question their own memories, their own instincts. It's not just about lying. It's about owning the version of truth that gets believed. And he didn't stop there. He discouraged interference altogether. "Everyone needs to back off," he posted. "You don't live here." The message was clear. Outsiders don't get to ask questions. They don't get to offer help. It's a tactic seen in controlling relationships, building an emotional wall so high, even concern feels like betrayal. The only call she may have made was to 911, and even that, we only know through Daniel's version. He called this protection. In one message, he wrote, "She doesn't need to talk to anyone right now. I'll handle it." To someone unfamiliar, it sounds like care. But in the context of isolation, silence, and control, it reads like capture. This isn't shielding. It's smothering. And so the question remains, where was Malaya? Not just in body, but in voice, in presence, in autonomy. Because in the weeks following her children's disappearance, one thing became painfully clear: Daniel didn't just control the house. He controlled the silence inside it. The broken family. In the weeks following the disappearance of her children, Malaya Brooks Murray left Daniel Martell. People in the community started noticing. One neighbor confirmed, "She's no longer living at that house. She left him." Another said she had moved back closer to her family. These weren't just rumors. They were repeated, consistent, and came from those who had been watching the case closely since day one. For more than a year, Malaya had been isolated, geographically, emotionally, and socially. Her family had not seen her or the children in over a year. As mentioned, her mother and sister said every attempt to visit was turned away with excuses. She stopped attending family dinners. She stopped answering messages. She just disappeared from their lives. And that disappearance wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Daniel spoke for her. He controlled every piece of communication with the outside world. He wrote the updates. He responded to comments. He explained her silence on her behalf. It was a textbook case of narrative control. But then, she left. There was no farewell post. No dramatic confrontation. Just absence. And with it, Daniel's voice began to fade too. The man who had once answered every comment, every question, suddenly went quiet. He stopped defending. He stopped narrating. He stopped speaking altogether. In controlling relationships, the power lies in containment. The house on Gairloch Road was a fortress, rural, off the grid, no visitors, no neighbors, no cameras. Without Malaya in that space, Daniel lost more than just a partner. He lost control of the entire structure. She was no longer contained. That meant something fundamental had changed. People began to speculate. Some believed she might be cooperating with authorities now. Others thought she had finally seen Daniel for who he really was. But one thing was undeniable: she was gone. And she left him behind. There's still no public statement from Malaya. But there might be a reason for that. According to multiple reports, RCMP has advised her not to speak publicly at this stage of the investigation. It's a recommendation often made to protect the integrity of a case. And it could partially explain her silence, a silence so complete, it has felt unsettling. But that raises another question. If RCMP urged her not to speak, did they give the same warning to Daniel? Or did he ignore it? Because while Malaya has vanished from the public eye, Daniel was everywhere in the early days. Writing statements. Debating the public. Framing the narrative. If he was told to stay quiet, he clearly didn't care. Or worse, maybe he was never told. And so, her silence stands out. It's no longer just a passive void. It's something to be examined. Something that might have been instructed. Or something she chose. But either way, it doesn't belong to Daniel anymore. For months, he had been the only voice. He told the story. He controlled the pace, the details, the tone. But when Malaya walked away, that story broke. It lost its shape. It lost its narrator. The first time we heard from her directly was when she called 911 to report her children missing. That was the only confirmed action she took independently. Leaving Daniel may have been the second. It may have been the most important one. We don't know what she's doing now. We don't know if she's working with police or staying silent for her own reasons. But we do know one thing. The woman who had once been absorbed into Daniel's voice, into his story, has, at least for now, stepped out of the frame. After the disappearance of Lilly and Jack, Daniel didn't respond with urgency or grief. Instead, he took a defensive posture, one that centered self as the person suffering most. Slowly but deliberately, he stopped being the concerned stepfather and started portraying himself as the victim of everyone else's suspicion. At first, he spoke confidently, controlling the narrative around the children's disappearance. But as pressure mounted, that confidence gave way to frustration. He began suggesting that the real harm was being done to him by the media public, even by Malaya's own family. People keep coming for me like they know what happened. You weren't there. You don't know what we've been through. The story, in his words, was no longer about missing children. It was about how unfairly he was being treated. Daniel made himself the target. He complained about people judging him without knowing the full story, painting himself as misunderstood. In his eyes, he had done everything for the kids, and yet received nothing but blame. This was a calculated shift, a way to reframe growing scrutiny as persecution and criticism as cruelty. But the public didn't respond the way he might have hoped. Instead of sympathy, his words triggered skepticism. People began noticing the gap between what he said and how he acted. There was no visible grief, no raw emotion, no desperation to find the children. His statements felt flat, defensive, even cold, as though the performance didn't match the role he was trying to play. Community members began to question why Daniel was always the one speaking, while Malaya remained completely silent. He claimed she didn't want to talk, that she was overwhelmed, and that he was simply handling things for her. But in context, it looked more like control than care. His voice filled the silence around her, leaving no space for her own. Even after Malaya left him, Daniel continued to suggest that she didn't act of her own will, that others had gotten into her head. Again, it was less about accepting the truth, and more about maintaining power over the version of events. He framed her departure as part of a larger campaign against him, rather than as an act of self-liberation. Over time, his posture shifted from defensive to dismissive. He said he was done explaining himself, that no one was listening anyway. This wasn't humility. It was disengagement, the classic retreat of someone who realizes they're no longer in control of the story. And as Daniel began to fade from public view, so did any remaining credibility he once had. His attempt to recast himself as the victim, the one who'd been wronged, misunderstood, and mistreated, fell apart under the weight of his own behavior. It didn't align with the facts. It didn't earn trust. And it never once centered the two children who were truly gone. In the end, what became most striking wasn't just what Daniel said. It was what he refused to say, what he refused to show. The missing urgency, the absence of emotion, the silence where love should have been. That's why, despite all his efforts to appear wounded and unfairly accused, the community, and eventually even Malaya, turned away. Weeks after Malaya left, Daniel vanished, not physically, but from the conversation he had once dominated. The man who had tirelessly posted updates, defended his character, and responded to every accusation suddenly fell silent. He stopped replying to comments. No new posts. No more explanations, just quiet. It was a dramatic contrast to the voice that had once echoed loudly across every thread related to Lilly and Jack's disappearance. For months, Daniel had shaped the public narrative. He didn't just represent himself, he represented both of them. He used language constantly, presenting a united front that now looked more like a performance. Once Malaya was gone, that illusion collapsed. There was no one left for him to speak on behalf of. And without that framing, it became clear he'd been speaking alone all along, controlling the message without permission. The silence that followed wasn't just noticeable. It was chilling. The same silence he'd once imposed on Malaya now engulfed him. And to many, that wasn't grief. It looked calculated. Some theorized the police had told him to stop talking. But no evidence ever confirmed that. Others believed it was simply the moment he realized he'd lost control. The words ran out. The story could no longer be held together. What made it more unsettling was the timing. There was no big development in the case. No new evidence. Just the quiet moment when Malaya walked away, and with her went his entire structure, his audience, his support, his excuse. The man who had built a digital fortress of control was suddenly nowhere to be found. He had silenced everyone else for so long. Now, there was no one left to speak for him. Let's imagine, for a moment, that Daniel Martell's narrative, the version pushed forward in live streams, online statements, and whispered family debates, isn't a deflection. What if it's the truth? If that's the case, the implications are staggering. At the heart of Daniel's claim is a story of calculated control and emotional instability. He suggests that Malaya, the mother of the children, is suffering from PTSD, a condition possibly triggered by years of trauma, abuse, or postpartum depression. He portrays her not as a criminal, but as a woman unraveling under pressure. One who may have snapped under the weight of fear. In his telling, she took the children not out of malice, but out of a desperate belief that she had to protect them. Even from the law. Even from their father. According to Daniel's camp, it wasn't a single act of madness. It was a pattern of behaviors, erratic decisions, isolation from those trying to help, deleting her own social media posts about the children, and eventually disappearing altogether. These are not the actions of a parent working with law enforcement to find missing children. These are the signs of a parent preparing to disappear permanently. Worse, Daniel's theory includes the possibility that all three children, Jack, Lilly, and Meadow, are now being hidden, potentially with help from a loose, connected group of young women, all friends of Malaya. These are people with no legal authority, no training, and possibly no understanding of what it takes to safely care for 3 children long-term. The theory holds that Malaya is not only on the run, but planning to flee the country, permanently removing the children from oversight, education, and protection. If that's true, then every moment they remain hidden adds new danger. There are even darker theories circulating. Some suggest that one or both children may have died accidentally, either before the disappearance or shortly after. In this theory, the remaining players are participating in a cover-up, spinning a story about CPS, mental illness, or conflict with Daniel to distract from a tragic truth. In another version, the children weren't harmed by accident, but were intentionally given or sold, trafficked out of fear, desperation, or manipulation by others. But even in the less extreme versions of Daniel's narrative, there's still danger. PTSD can impair decision-making. Untreated mental illness can cause paranoia, disconnection from reality, and rash behavior. If Malaya is sick and unsupported, she may believe she's protecting her children, even as she's putting them at risk. Running from CPS, avoiding hospitals, dodging police. It all suggests a world where the children's lives are lived in secrecy, far from the systems meant to keep them safe. This brings us to the hardest truth. There are no safe outcomes in this theory unless the children are found. If they are with Malaya, and she is unstable, they are in danger. If they were harmed or trafficked, the danger has already passed into tragedy. The only path to safety is immediate intervention, locating the children, assessing their condition, and placing them into the hands of trained professionals who can evaluate what went wrong and how to make it right. Until that happens, every word, every theory, and every delay only raises the stakes. And if Daniel was right all along, then we're already far too late. In every high-profile missing children case, there comes a point when public attention shifts. The facts blur into speculation. The timelines become tangled with theories. And the people involved are no longer just grieving parents or witnesses. They become characters in a story the public believes it has a right to interpret. But in the case of Jack and Lilly Sullivan, there's a lesson that rises above the noise. It is a reminder that when children disappear, the goal should never be to crown a winner in the battle of narratives. It should never be about proving one adult right and another wrong. It must be about one thing: bringing those children to safety. From the beginning, this case has been clouded by conflicting voices. On one side, a mother, Malaya, who went quiet, avoided the press, and ultimately disappeared. On the other, Daniel Martell, a stepfather turned vocal figure in live streams and social media circles, offering his version of events. Somewhere in between are extended family members, CPS records, leaked messages, and countless speculations. It's tempting to pick a side. It's easy to label one as the villain and the other as the victim. But real life is rarely that clean. Mental health, trauma, substance abuse, custody disputes, broken family ties, these things don't fit into headlines or hashtags. They are messy, painful, deeply human. When analyzing a case like this, it is essential to examine not only the emotional dynamics, but also the legal framework. If Malaya is hiding children from Child Protective Services, that has real legal consequences. If Daniel is accused of manipulation or abuse, those accusations carry weight that should be handled within a legal process, not just in the court of public opinion. Both possibilities are serious. Both require investigation, not assumption. Yet, as the legal system navigates its slow path, the community, both online and offline, has a role to play. That role is not to judge, but to care responsibly. To understand that both narratives might contain elements of truth, pain, and misinformation. That people caught in the middle of a crisis often act irrationally, say things they later regret, or retreat into silence not because they are guilty, but because they are overwhelmed. The real tragedy would be forgetting that this isn't about Daniel. It's not about Malaya. It's not even about who had the better livestream, or whose leaked text message looked more suspicious. It is, and has always been, about Jack and Lilly. Every hour spent Debating who's lying is another hour the children are not found. Every theory that vilifies one parent without proof distracts from the practical steps that could lead to their recovery. Every headline, every comment section war, every delay in official action chips away at the one thing this case should have prioritized from the start: protecting the innocent. The pain of those involved, whether real or perceived, must not be dismissed. But it also cannot override the central truth. No matter what trauma has unfolded between the adults, no matter how broken the relationships, the children never asked for this. And they deserve better than to become symbols of their parents' conflicts. So what can we learn from this? We can learn that compassion and skepticism must exist together. That believing survivors, supporting mothers, and holding men accountable should not be mutually exclusive. We can learn to demand evidence, not just emotion. And we can accept that sometimes the most honest answer is, we don't know yet. But most of all, we can learn that the end of this story should not be who was right. The end of this story should be Jack and Lilly, alive and safe. And until we know they are, the job isn't done. Let this case be a call to action, not for outrage, but for clarity. Not for picking sides, but for saving lives. The only justice worth fighting for here is the kind that brings two missing children back home. Everything else can wait.